Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for Florida Shines Virtual College Week. My name is Nashla Dewari, and I will be facilitating today's session, which will help you earn a degree without the debt and learn everything you need to know about the financial aid process. Now, before I begin, I want to go over a few items with you. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box, and we'll address them during the Q&A session with our speaker or in a follow-up email. Closed captioning is provided for this session. Please click on the link in the chat box provided. This session will also be recorded. The recording, along with any materials shared today, will be posted on our website at floridashines.org. Finally, we are live on Twitter, so feel free to share your comments and connect with us at FL Shines. Now, for those of you that are not familiar, Florida Shines empowers Floridians to earn a college degree and find a bright career by providing free online tools to help students, parents, and educators. We work with all of Florida's colleges and universities and other partners to help students succeed in school and beyond. Now, from floridashines.org, as a middle or high school student, you can explore Florida's colleges and universities. You can check your progress towards high school graduation. You can view your Bright Futures eligibility requirements, learn ways to pay for college, and much more. So I invite you to visit floridashines.org to learn more about these resources. Now, today I'm really excited to partner with a wonderful expert in the field of financial aid. I'd like to introduce our speaker, Daniel Barkowitz. Daniel is the Assistant Vice President of Financial Aid and Veterans Affairs at Valencia College. This is a position he's held since July of 2017. He is president of the Florida Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators and is the inaugural chair of National Commission of Certified Financial Aid Administrator Program. Congratulations, Daniel. While relatively new to Florida, Daniel is not new to financial aid. He has served over 30 years in institutional education, and some of his previous roles include Director of Financial Aid at MIT, Dean of Financial Aid and Associate Dean of Student Affairs for Columbia College and Columbia Engineering at Columbia University in the city of New York, Director of Operations and Training for Massachusetts Educational Financing Authority, and Assistant Director of Financial Aid at Boston College. Daniel earned his Bachelor of Science degree in History from Northeastern University and his Master's in Education and Human Resource Education from Boston University. Daniel, we are honored to have you with us today, and the floor is yours. And Daniel, you are muted if you're speaking.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us as we review financial aid, and my appreciation to Florida Shines for hosting this event. My hope in the next hour is you'll learn a lot of information about how federal and state and institutional financial aid work. We're going to cover what financial aid is. We're going to talk about the sources of financial aid, how we determine what you're eligible, when and how should you apply for financial aid. And as you heard, we'll have a copy of these slides for you. So after the event, you'll be able to get a copy of them yourself if there's anything you would want to keep. So to start, let me introduce myself, and you heard a little bit about some of the places that I've worked. So again, I've been working in financial aid for about 30 years for both public and private institutions, both undergraduate and graduate institutions, highly selective open access institutions, both small and large size institutions. So I have a fairly significant experience working really with all different kinds of institutions of higher education. And what I found is in that 30 years of experience, people get confused about financial aid. So I wanted to make sure with this session to try to demystify the process for you. I'll also share that as a parent of two college-age students, I'm also filling out the FAFSA every year myself. So I live this experience with you. I have a student who's a sophomore in college and one who just finished her undergraduate degree. So I'm also participating as a financial aid applicant as well. If we'll start, actually, if you want to type in the Q&A, I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and I'd love to see some responses for it from you. So the first question is, where are you, if you're the student, or if you're a parent, where are some colleges that your son or daughter is thinking about attending? So feel free to type some into the Q&A, and we'll see some of the answers that come out as. And while you're thinking about that, another question to think about is, what is the cost of that institution? So how much does a year at that institution cost? So I'm seeing, for example, one answer that was mentioned is University of Florida. What other answers do we have out there? Another, University of Florida, great. So let's see if we get some other answers out here. Florida State University, Flagler College, great. So a number of different kinds of institutions. Stanford or MIT, great. Seminole State, perfect. So as we think about the costs, let's think about some of those costs. So for example, at MIT or Stanford, the cost of a year of education these days is a little bit over $70,000 a year. So that's a big price tag, obviously. And obviously that's well beyond the means of most families. So, over 4 years, you're talking about somewhere close to $300,000. In case you think, well, I'll go in-state, it'll be much cheaper. That is true, but not necessarily a free ride either. So let's talk about some of the other expenses. So for example, at a UCF or Florida State, we're talking probably closer to $30,000 to $35,000 by the time you put all of the costs together. And we'll look at what makes up some of those costs in a slide coming up in a moment. And even colleges like Valencia, our total cost of attendance, and again, we'll define what that means in a second, can be somewhere close to $12,000 or $15,000 a year. So that seems like a lot of money, obviously. And so the third question is, how will you afford it? And that's really what we're here to talk about today, is how to pay for that cost. Second, here we go. So I want to start by giving you a little bit of an overview of financial aid that's available. So this information comes from the College Board. The College Board every year publishes trends in student aid. And this pie chart represents all the money that was given out to undergraduate students in 2017-18. When you can see from the pie chart, first of all, an important piece of information is that it was over $194 billion that was given out in total undergraduate financial aid. And if you look at the pie chart, you'll see a couple of interesting things. First of all, right, student loans are a large part of that pie chart. So if you add up student loans and parent loans and let's see, non-federal loans, you're talking about somewhere close to 34%, or about a third of the money that's available is in the form of loans. The other thing you'll see out there is grant information. So let's talk about grants for a minute. Federal grants, 15%. That's primarily the Pell Grant at $28 billion. But look at that institutional grant number. That's almost double the amount of the federal grant dollar. What's important to know about that is many colleges offer a great deal of funding to help offset their own educational expense. So now that I've scared you by talking about $70,000 a year at Stanford or MIT, those are examples of colleges that have a large amount of their own grant funding to make higher education affordable for families. So you can see institutional grants, federal grants. So we're going to make sure today to talk about applying for all of those funds, because we don't want you to turn down a source or not consider a source if you might qualify for it. In addition, you can see state grants here. It's a much smaller number nationwide, but Florida has a particularly wonderful state grant program through the Bright Futures program, but there are lots of other programs in Florida as well. So we'll spend a little time talking about those when we go through our presentation. The good news is that although you hear a lot about student loans and parent loans, in reality, the amount as a percentage of all the money available has actually been reducing over time. It used to be when I did these presentations about 10 years ago, it was about half the money that was in student loans or parent loans. So again, institutions have been stepping up, other providers have been stepping up as well. Now, the way this system is supposed to work is that if you and I earn the same amount of money and we have the same number of people in our family and we both, live the same kind of life, we should have the same kind of contribution for college. And if we have differences between us, if there are things about us that are different, so, you earn more than I do, you own your home, I rent mine, you have one less kid in college than I do. If something about us is different, then our contribution should be different. So again, that's the way the system is designed to work. In addition, it's important to note that you, parents and students, you have the first responsibility for paying for college. No one's going to step in and take that responsibility away from you, but we all will help once you've done what you can. This is a manageable process. It can feel overwhelming, but take the advice I'm going to give you today, and you can work this through in a way that will be manageable for you. So the next question is it worth it, right? When you talk about that kind of expense, we need to understand what's the financial return? What's the return on investment for students and families paying for this? Because this is a significant expense. And so what I wanted to share with you is some information that comes from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. This is national data. And just to explain what you're looking at, if you look at the left side of the chart, you'll see unemployment rates based on levels of education. So what's important to note about that is that nationally in 2018, the unemployment rate was 3.2%. You had a 3.2% chance of being unemployed in the United States if you wanted to work. But what you'll notice is that the unemployment rate is much higher for those who don't go through educational endeavors. So for example, for someone with less than a high school diploma, it's almost double the national unemployment rate. Even with just a high school diploma, it's more than the national unemployment rate. Same with some college and no degree. You decrease your likelihood of being unemployed. Again, look at the blue side of the chart by having associate, bachelor's, master's degrees, etc. On the right side of the chart, the green number, that's how much people are taking home in weekly earnings. Again, average based on level of education. So nationally, the average is about $932 a week in take-home pay. And what you'll see is to get above that average, you need to get your bachelor's degree. And again, this is national data. We have Florida data as well that shows that even an associate's degree in Florida will get you above Florida's state average. So really important that, again, if you understand that there's an investment here, but there's a significant return on that investment that's coming. Quick vocabulary. What vocabulary do you need to know when we talk about financial aid? There are really three different pieces. There's COA, or cost of attendance, and that's that number that I talked about before. So MIT, a little above 70,000, at my institution, about 15,000. What is that number? Now, that's not a check that they're going to expect you to write. That's not a bill you're going to receive. It's a total cost. It's a reflection of not just tuition, but also room and board, so the costs of living, your fees, your books and supplies, your transportation, and personal expenses. One tip, one piece of advice is to keep in mind you have control over some of these expenses in terms of how you, as a student, live your life. One of my good friends in my history of financial aid was the director of financial aid at Harvard Law School. Her name was Sally Donahue. Sally used to say to me, or she actually used to say to her incoming law students as part of their first year orientation, if you live like a lawyer now, you'll live like a student when you finish law school. What she meant by that is manage your budget, right? So the same advice to you who are looking at college or university, live like a student now so you don't have to live like a student later, right? right? And some piece of advice: find a roommate. Don't choose the most expensive dorm room on campus. If you can get books at a cheaper rate, get books at a cheaper rate. Find used textbooks or rent textbooks. There are ways to save money on expenses that will benefit you because you, in some ways, control that cost of attendance. In our financial aid awards, we use an average cost of attendance. So we're not going to take money away from you if you're more frugal, but we're also not going to give you more money if you spend more than our average. So be careful about those expenses. So then you'll see the second piece here, which is EFC. This may be a new acronym to you. What does EFC mean? It means expected family contribution. This is a number that comes out of your application, and it's a measure of what you're expected to contribute over the course of a year. So that may be a number from 0 to 99,000, depending upon your family's individual eligibility. And the difference between those two numbers is how much you need to be able to pay for college. So to give you an example of some costs of attendance, here are some examples. So some of you named University of Florida or University of Central Florida. So these are all 2019, 2020 costs, the year that we're in right now. And you'll see if you look at some of these costs, what I've done is highlight for you for the public institutions 4 different costs. The orange line is if you live, the darker orange line, the bottom line, is if you live with your parents, but you're an in-state resident. In Florida, you have to have lived in Florida for a year and established residency before you start college to be able to qualify for in-state tuition. But that's an important discount, and we'll talk about that in a second. The blue line, the darker blue line, the second line from the bottom, that's if you're living either on or off campus in an apartment of your own, but you're an in-state resident. The next lighter orange line is if you're coming from out of state to attend the college, but you're living with relatives. And the top line is if you're coming from out of state and you're living either on campus in a dorm facility or a residence hall or off campus. You'll see, for example, that when you get to a private college like Stetson or Emory or MIT or Harvard, the numbers don't matter because they have one cost of attendance, regardless of in-state versus out-of-state. You'll also see that if you go to someplace like a UCF, you're receiving a significant discount by being a Florida resident. So the difference in cost is at UCF is about $20,000 between in-state and out-of-state, and that extends to a number of the colleges we're looking at here. So it gives you a sense of some of the types of expenses you might be looking at. But remember, those are all expenses, not simply tuition, but it's tuition, fees, room and board. As an example, at Valencia, a student who goes full-time for 2 terms would really wind up spending more like about $3,100 in tuition if they're an in-state resident. The rest of that is all of those other expenses. How does this formula work? We talked about cost of attendance minus EFC equals need. Here's how this works. So let's say you're applying to 5 different colleges, and the colleges vary in cost from $70,000 a year down to $10,000 a year. And you go through the application cycle, and it's determined that you have an EFC, an expected family contribution, of $10,000. If you look, the difference between that cost, right, and that EFC is your need. So that yellow color, the top color on the slide, that's how much you need to be able to afford those institutions. And hopefully that's how much you'll qualify for in financial aid. So if we assume you qualify for all of the money you're eligible for, which again is not a bad assumption, but let's make that assumption for right now, you can see that no matter which college you go to, you should only have to pay out of pocket $10,000, your EFC. The remainder should be covered by financial aid. Now, that said, what do we know about that yellow money? About a third of that yellow need is going to be met by a student loan. So we know that on average, about a third of that's going to be a loan. So the EFC is one piece you'll pay for. Loans are another piece we'll pay for. And we'll talk a little more about loans as we go a little farther in the session. Actually, we'll do that now. So what are the different types of financial aid that you can qualify for? There are really three different kinds of financial aid. There are grants or scholarships. That's the best kind of money, obviously. That's money you don't have to repay. There are loans. That's money that does have to be repaid. And the third type is work. I want to talk for a minute about work. Work is a small percentage. It's actually less than 1% of the money nationwide, but it's significant. The work award's a chance for a student to work in a job on campus. And that's a great opportunity for the student to earn a wage really on the campus they're located at, so they don't have to even travel off campus to a job. They can work for an hour or two at a time and then go to class and come back and work some more. A great opportunity to find employment on campus, build some experience while they're in school. Both of my kids have done that, and it's been a great way for them to have some pocket money for them to use to pay for expenses at their location. So they're not coming to me all the time for allowance or funds. Let's talk about loans for a second. So loans for many families may be a necessity, but you need to be careful about how much you borrow. You want to make sure as a student that by the time you graduate, you will not have borrowed more in student loans than what you think your starting salary will be. Let me give you some examples. So let's say, and I'm going to make some numbers up, but let's say you're going to go through an undergraduate program and you want to graduate and become a secondary school teacher. That's your dream, is to teach in secondary schools and in high schools. Well, and let's say you've done your research and you've figured out, and again, I'm making this number up, but you figured out that secondary school teachers start at about $28,000 to $30,000 a year in your neighborhood in Florida. Well, what you want to make sure is that by the time you graduate college, that you've not borrowed more than $28,000 to $30,000 in total loans. That includes student loans, that includes car loans, that includes any kind of debt you might have, because otherwise you may have trouble making repayment after graduation. Instead of being a teacher, you've decided, you know what, I'm going to be an engineer. You figured out that engineers on average earn about $50,000 a year. Well, am I saying you should borrow $50,000? No. But what I am saying is that you have capacity to borrow a little more. Again, you want to earn that degree without the debt. So the less you can borrow, the better off you'll be. And we're going to talk about other ways to strategize around reducing your debt level as we go forward. What are the forms that you need to know? So families assume that there's only one form to file for financial aid. That's a fairly, but not right. So I want to go through the forms and let's pick a sample student. Let's say our sample student's name is Susan. And Susan is going to apply to 4 colleges. Susan's going to apply to MIT. She's also going to apply to UCF. She also is going to apply to, let's pick Stetson, and she's going to apply to Valencia. So those are the 4 colleges that she wants to apply to. How many financial aid applications will Susan's family have to complete? So let's see if any of you want to enter a guess. I said it wasn't 1. There are 4 colleges. Let's see if you can guess. Type in the question area how many applications you think Susan's family will have to pay. Remember, 4 colleges. So I'm seeing 4. That's a good guess. Hopefully not, but let's see. So remember your guess and let's see who's got it right. So I haven't seen a correct answer yet, but let's see. So let's go through them one at a time. And what I'm going to remind you is that every one of these, the application opens up on October 1st. So this past October 1st, for those of you who were in your senior year of high school, was the first day you could apply in any of these application forms. So let's look at the first of these application forms. The first one is the FAFSA. The FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid. It is free. That means you don't pay to use it. So that's important. If you're at a website that's asking you to pay money to complete the FAFSA, close your browser. You want to make sure you go to fafsa.ed.gov, or if you prefer, you can actually download via your app store on either Apple or the Windows platform. You can download the My Student Aid app. Google platform, either iPhone or Google. Or Android. You can download the My Student Aid app, and you can complete the FAFSA actually through the app itself. So either one, if you want to do it online, that's fine. If you want to do it via your phone, your smartphone, the My Student Aid app is available. When you fill out the FAFSA, you do it once per year. It's in the name of the student, and you list all of the colleges you're planning on applying to. Now, if you think about a traditional student, right now it's October, they may not know whether they're really going to apply for admission to some colleges yet or not. That's fine. Make sure to list all of the colleges that you think you'll apply to on that free application form. It is free, so you can always go back later and add more colleges if you need to. But again, you want to make sure to get that in as soon as possible. And we'll talk about timing in a second as well. Form you might want to know is, or at least be aware of, in Susan's case, is the CSS Financial Aid Profile. This is a form that many private colleges, private not-for-profit colleges, have that does cost some money, and we'll talk about why a little later, but you do have to pay for this form. And there are waivers available if you come from a low-income family. But this is the link, student.collegeboard.org, where you can do a Google search for financial aid profile. Of the colleges that I mentioned for Susan, Emory requires the form. I know that MIT requires the form, and Stetson does as well. Valencia does not. UCF does not. So again, you need to think carefully and look carefully at what forms are required for your college, but you may need to do this profile. What happens if you don't do it? Well, remember I said the majority or a lot of the grant money is coming from the college. This is how you apply for that grant money. So you want to make sure that you get your application in. You don't need to do it for federal funds, but you do for institutional funds. So you don't want to miss out. You want to make sure you get that form filed if the college does require it. Form is an institutional application. So for example, at Valencia College, we have a foundation that provides a large number of scholarships. And the only way you can qualify for those is by filling out our Valencia College Scholarship Foundation application. If you don't, we won't qualify you. Really important that if the college has a separate application, you find out what that application is and how to fill it out. Some might not, but many do have their own individual applications as well. So if we look at that, that means we've got one FAFSA, one profile, and I said Susan was applying to 4 colleges. So that brings us to 6 applications in total. Is Susan done? There's one additional application we want to talk about, and that's for the state of Florida. So if you're a Florida resident, if you're living in Florida, Florida has more than 12, or has 12, different state scholarship, grant, and work programs available. Many people know about Bright Futures, but there are lots of other programs as well. Some are need-based, meaning that you have to have financial need, but others don't. And the applications open up October 1st, but even if you're not going to qualify for Bright Futures, you want to make sure that your student has done the Florida financial aid application. Many high schools will complete this application through the high school, perhaps in an English class or a social studies class during senior year. You want to find out from the high school, have they done this? Because really important that the student completes that form as well. So for Susan, we have a total of 7 forms. So the person who guessed 8 was pretty close. So we've got 1 FAFSA, 1 profile, the 4 institutional applications, plus that last form, which again is the Florida financial aid form. How do you sign a form? Obviously, you're doing all these forms generally online, not in paper format. Provide a signature. Well, for federal forms, you're going to set up something called the FSA ID. FSA is Federal Student Aid. What this is it's your electronic signature. It's used for all federal student aid websites. So later, when and if you have to borrow a loan, you'll use the same FSA ID. One is required for the student, and the parent, if the parent has to sign the FAFSA, needs their own FSA ID. So you each would have one FSA ID. To register, you have to have two different email addresses. So if the student doesn't have their own email address, you want to make sure to get one. Set it up at fsaid.ed.gov. If you don't go there first and you just start working on your FAFSA, it will link over for you as well. But you want to make sure to set up an electronic signature. For many families, that piece will take longer than the FAFSA itself because they have to prove your identity. So you're going to provide some information, including your social security number, your date of birth. You'll have an email address they'll have to confirm with you, and a cell phone, much like when you set up a bank account and you want electronic access or a credit card. You want to make sure that you do that so you have a secure connection and they can prove that it's you. This is my joke for the evening. I know I'm not seeing you in person, so usually when I do these presentations, I ask for a laugh. If you want to send a laugh in the chat, I appreciate that too. Here's my joke. It's not a parent who is a parent. So what do I mean by that? What do I mean by it's not a parent who is a parent? What I'm talking about are divorced and separated households. For the FAFSA, it's pretty clear that if your parents are married, when it asks for parent one and parent two, you put both parents on the FAFSA. But what happens if your family is different than that, if your parents are divorced? Right? In that situation, it is who the child lives with who's considered a parent. So let's say you're a student, your parents are divorced, and you live with mom. For the purposes of FAFSA, mom is the only parent you list on the FAFSA. You don't answer any questions about dad because dad doesn't live with you. What if mom is remarried? So what if there's mom and stepdad? Well, in that situation, parent one would be either mom or stepdad, and parent two would be the other, because that's the custodial household that the student is living in. By the way, the reason that the FAFSA says parent one and parent two is because for same gender families, so same sex couples, parent one, parent two, used to say father and mother. That changed a number of years ago to recognize families of all different types. So what if your family is in a situation where you're evenly divided? So you're the student, you spend absolutely half of the year with one parent and half of the year with the other parent. Who then fills out the FAFSA? In that situation, the question becomes who provides more financial support? So if you literally are half and half divided, it's which parent gives more financial support. That's who fills out the FAFSA. Notice it never says who claims the child on a tax return. There's nothing about that anywhere in here. It's all about where the child lives. Other applications like profile. Well, some colleges, mainly private colleges who use the profile, might ask that divorced or separated parent to do their own application because they believe that a parent's responsibility for paying for college doesn't end at divorce. But that's only for their funds and only for those colleges. So if you're not applying to a college that needs profile, you don't have to worry about it. If you are, it's worth asking the college, what are you going to do with this information? How do you analyze my family? MIT is one as an example. So anyway, you can take a look and see. If you have questions, ask the college. What year's information am I going to use? So you might think this is an easy question, but it gets a little complicated. So let's look at this together. So for students who are seniors in high school right now, they're going to start attending college in the 2020 to 2021 application year or attendance year. So went online October 1, 2019. It just went live. The FAFSA for that year just went live. But keep in mind, that means that the last tax year that was done when the FAFSA went live was the 2018 tax year. So when you fill out the FAFSA, you're using your income from 2018, the income you earned from January to December of 2018. You filed that tax return, hopefully, between January and April of 2019, or if you were late, as late as October of 2019. So now you're going to fill out that FAFSA, and the school year starts in August of next year, with the bill generally being due June for fall, June or July, and then December for your spring semester. That's your income. But your assets and people, your household, number of kids in the family, number in college, that's filled out as of the day you file the FAFSA or the profile or whatever application. It's as of your filing date. Well, what happens if you're in a different situation? Let's say something dramatic has happened so that your 2018 income doesn't reflect what is your actual situation. So maybe, for example, someone lost a job or there's been a loss of a parent in the family. What do you do then? In those situations, you can actually speak to the financial aid officer and request something called a professional judgment, where the financial aid officer can work with you to document that your income for the current year is not going to be the same. It's going to be dramatically different from what it was in 2018. And they will work with you to provide some options for appeal. This is an option that colleges have. It's not a requirement, but many colleges do provide professional judgment as a reality for many families. So we got a good question. I'm just going to go back for a second and answer this one. The question is, what if you have 50-50 custody and your 50-50 financial responsibility for the child as agreed upon and signed by a judge in a custody agreement? If you are legitimately 50-50 on custody and 50-50 on financial responsibility, then choose a situation. In my recommendation, I would choose the parent who has the lower income for obvious reasons. But basically, in that situation, you can choose between the two in terms of who's going to be the filer. There's no requirement otherwise. Okay, so let's move on and look at how does the information get on the FAFSA. So when you fill out the FAFSA, there's this really neat tool called the IRS Data Retrieval Tool, which allows you to automatically link information from the IRS directly to your FAFSA. So that means you don't have to type in your financial information. It will go out and retrieve the information from the IRS for you. You have to make sure that you have the address you filed the tax return under, you know that, and you know your filing status. But once you have that, you should be able to link without having a need to go and actually type in the income information. You always can, but one thing you want to make sure, and one reason you want to do it this way, is because it reduces your chance of being selected for verification. I'll talk about that in a second. If you do use the DRT, the data retrieval tool, you won't see the data you transfer. It will show up as pound signs on your application rather than your actual number to protect you. The reason for that is they don't want some hacker to be able to get access to your tax information. You can choose to enter all of your information by hand, but if you do so, you have a greater likelihood of being selected for verification. What is verification? Well, about 35% of student applicants every year nationwide are selected to prove the information that they've submitted on the FAFSA. That includes income information and household information. And to do that, we might require something like the following: either a copy of your tax form, which is why I suggest using the IRS DRT, because that will guarantee we don't need a copy of your tax form. Colleges have their own verification form, where they'll ask you to list out members in your household and other information. And they may require, colleges may be asked to require proof of identity from you, proof of your immigration status, or proof of your high school graduation. If so, it's not because we're trying to be mean. It's because the federal government says to us, before we can pay your financial aid, we're required to collect this information and verify it. So again, that's usually about a third of applicants nationwide. And you'll know because there'll be a message when you fill out the FAFSA that will tell you that, and the college will be in touch with you about it. On how do we determine what you're eligible for? We use something called federal methodology. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but if you think about it, we collect all that information you provide, we put it through a funnel, and at the bottom end of that is your family contribution. What's important to know, one piece that's really important to know, is that for families that have more than one kid in college, that number is divided by the number in college. So, for example, let's say your family contribution is determined to be $12,000, but there are 3 kids going to college at the same time. In that situation, each one of them would have a $4,000 contribution. 12,000 divided by 3, 4,000. Let's say the next year comes and one of them is graduated. Well, the next year the contribution would be 12,000 divided by 2, or 6,000 per child. Well, let's say the next year comes and there's now only one kid in college. That student in college would have a $12,000 contribution. So just keep in mind the number in college has a major impact on your ability to pay for college, and colleges recognize that. The federal government recognizes that. But if you have a year where all of a sudden you've gone from more kids in college to less, you might see a significant change in your financial aid award. To figure out who needs to apply, though, there's a really important question. Are you a dependent or an independent student? If you're a student and you can answer yes to any of the questions on the screen, then you're considered independent. And in that situation, no parent has to provide information on the form. So you can see that includes being older than 24, master's degree, being married or separated but not divorced, having kids who receive more than half of their support. You can read down the list. If you can answer yes to any of these questions, you're considered an independent student. Otherwise, parent information is required. But what if your situation is unique? Let's say, for example, you're not in touch with your father and your mother has been incarcerated, or you're in a situation where parents are out of state, you haven't had contact with them for many, many years, but you live with your grandparents. And your grandparents don't have legal guardianship of you. Who fills out the form? If you're in a unique situation, you have the option of asking the college for what's called an independent override, where they can look at your documentation and make a decision about whether or not to grant you independent status. If so, then you'll be able to fill out the FAFSA with no parent information. If your parents just simply refuse to fill out the form, that's not a legitimate excuse. That you can still qualify for an unsubsidized loan, meaning the government won't pay interest on it, and it will be a small loan. But if you need that, that is an option. But not simply willing to fill out the form is not grounds for an ability to declare you independent. So what about private colleges? They have their own methodology, and those formulas generally vary school by school, but in general, they tend to be more strict, and they often include home equity, where the FAFSA does not. On the FAFSA, you do not list your home as an asset, but private schools tend to look at the home as well. So just that for private money, they may have their own rules about how they determine how much you're eligible for. You're confused, maybe. Maybe you need an easy way to figure out what your family contribution is. I've got it much easier. I made it much easier for you. The federal government requires every college to have something called a net price calculator. Usually listed on their admissions page or financial aid page, but if you log in and provide some basic information, you can get an estimate from the college of what your EFC will be and what financial aid award you might qualify for. And the message here is garbage in equals garbage out, GI equals GO. What I mean by that is you want to make sure when you complete these EFC calculators, net price calculators, you're putting your best information in. But here's a good way to find out how much your family contribution is and whether college is really affordable for you, how you're going to pay for college. There's a great way to figure that out. Speaking of, how do you pay your family contributions? You're going to get a number that's going to feel a bit overwhelming. Family contribution I do every year I look at that family contribution and I think, how am I going to pay that amount? Where is that money going to come from? And as a reminder, that family contribution is supposed to be a measure of three things: what you can afford from your savings, so past income, what you can afford from your present income, and what you might be able to afford with your future income. So, as an example, for my daughter who's in college right now, we have a savings account. We've put money in a college savings account, and I use some of that money every year to help pay for part of her tuition expense, the part not covered by financial aid. Then, using my present income, I tend to sign up for a 10-month payment plan. Many colleges will offer a 10-month payment plan where, let's say your balance is $10,000 and you can afford $1,000 a month. You just divide that by 10 and pay that monthly. It's not a loan, and it's coming out of your current income. After those 10 months are done, you have nothing more that you owe under that program. So you might find yourself using a combination of your savings, a present payment plan like a 10-month payment plan, and maybe some future income. You might be borrowing a small loan to help you pay for your children's college expense if you're a parent. So there are multiple ways to pay that family contribution. This up, we're going to start moving toward close, and I want to make sure we have time for questions as well. What I want you to think about is, let's say you imagine that I sit in my office and I'm surrounded by barrels, and every barrel represents a student who comes to my institution. And my job is to help fill up the barrel with money. And let's say you have a student who's coming to my institution. Well, the cost of attendance is 15,000. So it's going to take 15,000 coins to fill up the barrel. What is the first thing I'm going to put in that barrel? It's the family contribution, that EFC. So let's say that family contribution was greater than 15,000. Would the student be able to qualify for financial aid? Not really. There is one kind of financial aid, though, that any student can qualify for, and that's what's called an unsubsidized direct loan. For many parents on the call, when you were in college, this was called the guaranteed student loan or the Stafford loan. It's now called the direct loan. And the unsubsidized means that the government will not pay the interest while your student's in school. If there is room in the barrel when you put that loan in, it's subsidized and the government might pay or will pay the interest while the student's in school. But if it's unsubsidized, you, the student, will have that interest built up, and you'll have to start paying back on that interest when you begin paying back on the loan itself. So an unsubsidized loan is available for anyone, but it depends on whether there's room in your barrel. So we have family contribution. Next, I put gift aid in here. So maybe a $2,000 grant, scholarship. What's next? Well, you have that direct loan, some work study. What happens if the college can't meet your barrel or can't fill your barrel? Who has to pay the rest of the cost to fill up the barrel? In this situation, there's what we call unmet need that couldn't be met by financial aid funds, and that would be the responsibility of the family. So for this family, it's really a $6,500 cost, right? The EFC of 5,000 plus the unmet need of 1,500. That gets us to 6,500. And this student has loan and work that they're going to have to pay back over time or earn while they're in school. What happens if you get a private scholarship? Where does that go? Let's say you go out and get a scholarship from the Elks Club or Kiwanis or a local employer. Where does that go? That can help reduce your unmet need. So again, the first thing it will go toward is that unmet need, reduce how much then you have to work or borrow. The last thing it will touch will be the gift aid, this grant or scholarship, and the very last thing will be your family contribution. Insider tips. You want to make sure that if you have questions, you ask them. I would keep a copy of everything you submit. Make sure you don't miss any deadlines. If you take nothing else away from this call, remember these 4 words: never miss the deadline. Many colleges have priority deadlines. You want to make sure to get your forms in on time. We're going to look at a calendar very quickly now so you can see some of the ideas of when those forms are due. But please make sure to look at each college and make sure to find out what their deadlines are. Example, today we talked about 3 sources of funding: federal government, we talked about state government, we talked about college and university funding. There are other kinds of funding. private agencies, professional associations, parent employers. So how do you find access to those scholarships? There is a lot of money available. And so I would recommend that you look at scholarship searches. One of the ones that's probably one of the biggest nationwide is called FastWeb. Here's the link. They have over 1.5 million scholarships on their listings, valued at $3.4 billion annually. What you can do is set up a profile, set up your individual email address, or you might want to create a new one, and it start to filter down. If you put in information about your family, your religious background, your academic interest, your height, your gender, you might find that you start to winnow down the scholarships to ones that are available for you. When my daughter and I did this together, we started with 1.5 million scholarships. We brought this down to about 70 scholarships that she specifically matched for. And those were the ones that she targeted. Keep in mind, the ones with essays tend to have less applicants. So if you're going to apply to one, you might want to target those that require a little more work. They tend to be the ones that fewer applicants apply to. And remember, your school might have its own scholarship program or application, like we do at Valencia. So I said we'd do a quick financial aid calendar. Let's look at some of the dates. So remember, October 1, I said, is when those financial aid applications go live. Many colleges have early decision deadlines November 1st. But for many families, November or December is when you're going to complete your application forms. Lots of schools have deadlines somewhere between December and February for applications, early deadlines. So you want to make sure to find out when those deadlines are. In late February or March, the college might call you with questions or email you. And generally, at the end of March to early April is when you start receiving admissions and financial aid notifications. You apply now, but you might not hear from the college until March or April. And you'll usually hear about admissions first, followed by financial aid, or you might hear about them together. On through the calendar, in April, you're going to start comparing award letters from different schools. By May 1, you have to make a decision about what school the student's going to go to. In May, you may be required to pay deposits to hold your student's spot. If you can't afford that, talk to the college and they might be willing to waive it if you have a significant financial aid award. In June is when you get your bill for the fall semester. In October of that fall semester, the FAFSA and CSS profile go live again. Remember, every year you have to apply for financial aid. In November, December, you get the bill for the spring semester, and the cycle starts again. So just keep in mind that every year there's an application process. What if you need more help? Where do you go if you need more assistance? So a couple of recommendations. This is the website for the FAFSA online, site for that CSS financial aid profile online. And here's a great link for an all-around information page that has good information about scholarship searches other than FastWeb, other information about how we do what we do. A great piece. I would also suggest that you look at every college's financial aid office's webpage. Their webpage will have specific information about their programs and how they offer and what they offer from their particular piece. Your high school guidance office, they can be a good source for information on scholarships that might be specifically referred to or awarded at that high school. Here's your last source. So we are going to take some questions, but I want to say and make this offer to you. If there are questions that you didn't get answered today, or if there's something you have a question about, feel free to be in touch with me. This is my email address. You can feel free to reach out to me, and I'd be happy to answer any questions after today's webinar. And if there are particular, again, personal questions you would like to ask. Let me turn it back to my friends at Florida Shines to see what kind of questions there might be with our last 5 minutes or 6 minutes together.
Thank you, Daniel, so much for sharing such a wealth of resources. It actually looks like you were able to answer a lot of the questions during your session, so we appreciate you addressing those. While we'll wait a minute to see if there are any questions coming in, I'm going to reiterate your words. Never miss a deadline. I wrote that down even for myself. So that's really important. But yeah, it looks like we were able to address all of your questions during the session. So I want to thank you for your participation. We will forward along any questions that come in after today. And for our audience, I want to thank you for participating. I want to invite you to our next session on Florida Shines resources. And we look forward to seeing you online. So thank you again.